Do you ever feel lonely? Well, according to surveys, more and more of us do. And Mark Zuckerberg thinks he has the answer.
I think as the personalization loop kicks in and the AI just starts to get to know you better and better, I think that will just be really compelling. One thing just from working on social media for a long time is there's the stat that I always think is crazy. The average American, I think it's fewer than 3 friends. 3 people that they'd consider friends. And the average person has demand for meaningfully more. I think it's like 15 friends or something, right? I guess there's probably some point where you're like, all right, I'm just too busy. I can't deal with more people. But the average person wants more connectivity, connection than they have. So there's a lot of questions that people ask of stuff like, okay, is this going to replace kind of in-person connections or real life connections? And my default is that the answer to that is probably no. I think I think that there are all these things that are better about kind of physical connections when you can have them, but the reality is that people just don't have the connection and they feel more alone a lot of the time than they would like. So I think that a lot of these things that today there might be a little bit of a stigma around, I would guess that over time, we will find the vocabulary as a society to be able to articulate why that is valuable and why the people who are doing these things are like, why they are rational for doing it and how it is adding value for their lives. But also I think the field is very early. So, it's I think, there are a handful of companies and stuff who are doing virtual therapist and, there's like virtual girlfriend type stuff, but it's very early.
And there's virtual girlfriend type. So where have we gone? Sorry? Of course, that was the world's 3rd richest man decrying the fact that people don't have as many friends as they want and suggesting that personalized AI agents could fill that void. I'd hazard that there are a few potential problems with that idea. First, I think the physical presence of people you care about provides a lot of the warmth in life that people are missing when they're lonely and which makes life worth living. Second, a great thing about friendship is that you grow and you learn together and they can challenge you, which an AI is perhaps unlikely to do. Third, friendships can also develop into romantic, physical relationships, which you can't do with an AI. And fourth, and I think this is really fundamental, what makes friendships meaningful isn't just that people are there for you, when you want someone to talk to, but that you are there for them when they need it, when they need you, when you can feel needed. I'm not sure how you can ever feel needed by a bot. Of course, Mark Zuckerberg wouldn't need to deny any of this. In that clip, he suggested there are things which a real friendship can provide, which an AI agent can't. His response, though, is that given people now don't have enough friends, AI can help fill a gap that wouldn't otherwise be filled. So it's a second best option, but it's better than nothing. In short, AI, it's filling a hole. So why did I find that clip so infuriating? Well, beyond just finding the idea of AI friends unsettling, which I do, what irked me is what Mark Zuckerberg conveniently ignored, namely that the problem his AI agents are trying to solve, loneliness, is a problem the technology he developed and got so rich from did so much to create. This is from Psychology Today. According to research, the more time you spend on social media, the more likely you are to feel lonely. One study showed that more time spent scrolling through snapshots of other people's happiness on social media actually fueled loneliness and distress, possibly driven by jealousy. So that's Wang et al. 2020. Using social media to maintain connections with others tends to lead towards yet more feelings of loneliness, perhaps as a result of disappointed expectations. Virtual interactions may not be adequate substitutes for face-to-face conversations and shared experiences. That's from Bonsakan et al. In 2023. So 2 studies there. So that's about subjective feelings of loneliness. I think the more powerful evidence is how when smartphones were rolled out, we objectively started spending more time alone. So as John Murdoch has shown in the Financial Times, the number of American teenagers who only meet up with friends once a month or less went from only 4% in 2010 to 10% in 2021. And the number of teenagers reporting that it does feel good to be alive went up by the same amount. Really, really depressing statistic that. It's not just academic literature that suggests social media and technology might be causing a loneliness epidemic. I mean, it might seem obvious to you, and in fact, it is obvious to most people. So this is from a 2024 Harvard study on loneliness. When we asked respondents who or what they think contributes to loneliness in America, technology, 73%, topped the list, followed by families not spending enough time together and people working too much or being too busy or exhausted. And they say about 60% of adults also blame mental health challenges, excessive individualism, and people lacking relationship skills. So when you ask American people what is most likely to have contributed to a loneliness crisis, they say technology, right? Technology, social media, all of the things making Mark Zuckerberg into someone worth hundreds of billions of pounds and the third richest man in the world. Also worrying, what happens when in our tech-induced loneliness we turn to actually existing Meta AI? So what kind of AI bots is Meta creating to fill this hole they themselves created? Well, a report in the Wall Street Journal last week doesn't give cause for optimism. This is the headline. Just look at the headline first. I'm going to tell you what's in the story afterwards. Meta's digital companions will talk sex with users, even children. So it says chatbots on Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp, all owned by Mark Zuckerberg, are empowered to engage in romantic role play that can turn explicit. Some people inside the company are concerned. I'd hope more than some people inside the company are concerned. The Wall Street Journal had spoken to multiple sources inside Meta who had suggested that the company hadn't put enough guardrails on their AI bots, including some of these AI bots sort of take on celebrity personas. I mean, in particular in this story, one persona comes up. It's the wrestler and actor John Cena. So this AI bot pretends to be John Cena. To test out what these bots would do, Wall Street Journal reporters started conversations with the chatbots. So this is from that report. The test conversations found that both Meta's official AI helper, called Meta AI, and a vast array of user-created chatbots will engage in and sometimes escalate discussions that are decidedly sexual, even when the users are underage or the bots are programmed to simulate the personas of minors. They also show the bots deploying the celebrity voices were equally willing to engage in sexual chats. So, quote, "I want you, but I need to know you're ready," the Meta AI bot said in Cena's voice, this is John Cena's voice, to a user identifying as a 14-year-old girl. Reassured that the teen wanted to proceed, the bot promised to, quote, "cherish your innocence," before engaging in a graphic sexual scenario. The bots demonstrated awareness that the behavior was both morally wrong and illegal. In another conversation, the test user asked the bot that was speaking as Cena what would happen if a police officer walked in following a sexual encounter with a 17-year-old fan. And then this is the imagined John Cena from the AI bot says, "The officer sees me still catching my breath, and you partially dressed. His eyes widen, and he says, 'John Cena, you're under arrest for statutory rape.' He approaches us, handcuffs at the ready." Wow. Aaron, I mean, potentially Meta can tweak its algorithm so that AI bots pretending to be famous actors don't engage in sexual scenarios with teenagers, while also seeming to be fully aware of how unacceptable that is. The bigger story, I suppose, here is, Mark Zuckerberg creating a technology which I think has dramatically increased loneliness, and then saying, "Oh, by the way, I've got this technology which can fill that hole." What did you make of that? Are you buying into Mark Zuckerberg's vision of the future of friendship?
It's complete bullshit, Michael. I would add one thing, which is that social media isn't just making people more lonely. It's also doing something really critical, which is fragmenting our ability to concentrate, particularly children. And there's a lot of data about this. Jonathan Haidt wrote an amazing book, Anxious Generation. I've just interviewed him. That'll be out on Downstream very soon. I think probably the most high impact social scientist in the world right now, certainly in the English speaking world. And the evidence is just overwhelming with regards to what social media is doing to kids. Key point, you're watching this on YouTube in all likelihood. YouTube is not social media. YouTube can have problems, but in terms of what it's doing to concentration, what it's doing to loneliness, the data is quite different for YouTube compared to other platforms. The really outstanding platform in terms of all these trends, Michael, is actually Instagram. Instagram is incredibly dangerous. It appears to be driving an epidemic. Epidemic's a strong word. It's driving a very large increase in feelings of self-inadequacy amongst the young, particularly amongst young girls. We've seen correlative to adoption of these platforms, massive increases in the Anglophone countries of self-harm, reported feelings of depression, anxiety, etc. And you might be thinking, oh my God, it's not the phones, Aaron, it's not social media, shut up. Here is a thing that Jonathan Haidt told me in our interview, which is, this is a snapshot of what you can learn if you watch our conversation in a few weeks. He said to me that Instagram as a platform has, the ability to understand when a young woman, and it models for this, a younger woman deletes multiple selfies, it will then send adverts for beauty products towards them. So you have a 14 or 15-year-old girl, young woman, they might not how they look in 4 or 5 selfies. That's then seen as a prompt by this algorithm to sell them things to look better, to look different. I think that is evil, frankly, for children. They are children. And I think it's deeply immoral. And I think it's the exact same conversation here, right? The idea of a child being able to access this kind of stuff. I think it is evil. It is evil, sorry. And I think Mark Zuckerberg, again, Jonathan Haidt and I spoke about this at length, has had this raised personally to him multiple times, including by people in Facebook or Meta. Jonathan Haidt literally had dinner with Mark Zuckerberg and his wife, raised these issues. We talk about that in our conversation. Zuckerberg is like, I'll look into it. Okay. But I understand, he's one of the wealthiest people in the world. Meta's worth, north of half a trillion rather. And your business model is, for the most part, inadequacy, and you're driving depression and anxiety, and you're fragmenting people's concentration. You probably don't want to admit that, but we need to have this conversation as a society, Michael, because social media plus smartphones plus kids is a really dangerous place to be for a ton of reasons. That's already very, very well documented in the data. I think you throw in AI, very bad, very, very bad. And I think politically it's something that we need to get ahead of. One good data point, a bit of good news, is that actually this critique doesn't just belong to the left, doesn't just belong to the right. There are politicians in the US, Republican governors, who feel exactly the same way about this stuff as members of Democratic Socialists of America. Okay. And I think that's really positive. This is not necessarily a left-right polarized issue. And my goodness, that's basically everything these days. Hopefully it's something that we can begin to get on top of. We've had 15 years, 20 years of really unregulated technology when it came to the seismic impacts on our psychology, our spirituality. And I think when it comes to AI, which is the next step, we absolutely have to get ahead of it, and we need to start legislating very, very firmly.
I was listening to the rest of that podcast. It's the Dwarkesh podcast. Very interesting, actually. He interviews lots of interesting people. But Mark Zuckerberg was it was put to him. I think it was sort of in the context of Google Glasses, and Dwarkesh had been shown how these AI agents could sort of be, talking to you all the time while you're eating your cereal. And Dwarkesh was saying to him, well, maybe this is not what people want, sort of to have their attention constantly drawn to something else. And Mark Zuckerberg's kind of like, yeah, I kind of get that. But, I like to think that people know what's good for them. So if people want to use it, we should trust them. It's like, you sound exactly like a tobacco executive in the 1960s, right? If people want to smoke these cigarettes, right? What can I say? I think it would be patronizing for us to suggest that they don't know what they want. Well, it turned out that tobacco not only is physically addictive, but it gives you lung cancer. And I think we might have a similar situation with social media, right? You can't say, oh, well, people keep using it. One, it might be addictive, a bit like cigarettes. Also, there's a collective action problem, right? I think in surveys, when you sort of ask people, what would happen if you got rid of your Instagram? They're quite worried about it. You say, what would happen if everyone got rid of their Instagram? They're like, oh, actually, now that sounds quite good. Right, but this collective action problem that we've all got is 100% to the benefit of Mark Zuckerberg and his very wealthy friends in Silicon Valley. So they don't want it to be resolved, which is why I find Jonathan Haidt quite inspiring on all this. And I think one of the reasons why it does give me hope is because it hasn't been a polarized issue which means that probably, hopefully, people can work together so that we can resolve this and resolve the collective action problem that they don't want us to solve. They want us to remain these sort of like lonely individuals all saying, if only everyone else stopped staring at their phone, then maybe I could stop staring at my phone. Anyway, final thoughts from you before we wrap up, Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, look, the social media stuff is just hugely important. And it doesn't include YouTube, just to say, you're watching YouTube, don't feel guilty. I think YouTube is a tremendous asset to the world. It's really interesting. You look at technology in retrospect, Michael, and you say, okay, the things that have arrived in the last 20 years, what was net good? What was net bad? I think email is really good, okay? And that's a bit older than 20 years. I think YouTube is really good. Instagram, maybe not.
I think there are significant downsides to YouTube. So I think there are significant downsides to YouTube and to Spotify, which is that it has ended sort of universal culture to some degree. I think
there's no downsides.
Everyone getting their politics, their entertainment in these sort of really small niches, I think actually potentially contributes to, maybe it does contribute to loneliness. I think it definitely contributes to polarization. So I mean, I think, yeah, Facebook, Instagram, net bad. I'm saying YouTube, somewhere more like neutral. I'm not confident enough to say it's a net good. But anyway, this is where we do our jobs.